Hey there, my friends. Mary Rose Wood here on Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time, give or take a couple of minutes. And I'm so delighted to be doing this weekly live stream with you all. We're going to talk about story structure and writing craft. And today in particular, we are going to talk about the concept of the hero. So before we get into it, anybody who's watching on Facebook, you can do the Facebook thing. You go to streamyard.com/Facebook and give permission to show your name. This way, if you choose to participate and ask questions, which I hope you will, I'll know to whom I have the pleasure of responding. I'm very excited about today's topic, the topic of the hero. And I sat down in my excitement to make up a few notes about it. And I have so many notes, so I'm going to try to cover some stuff. It is the kind of idea that comes up a lot when we start to talk about story structure. In my experience, coaching writers, teaching writers through my own program, Path of the Storyteller, the concept of the hero is sometimes it triggers a little pushback. All right, not to put too fine a point on it. So I want to talk about that and what that might all be about. Anybody who's here live, if you've got questions about the idea of the hero, how it works in your own writing, your own thinking about story structure, you know that I love to hear them, and we'll always try to answer your questions before we wrap up. Okay, so before I get into it, for those of you who don't know, like it says, I'm Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author. I'm best known for my middle grade fiction, but I also teach and mentor writers through Path of the Storyteller. And I have to tell you something, story structure is my jam. I mean, it really transformed my experience of what it meant to be a writer. And I consider it the foundation of any writer's training. And anybody who's been through my program, you know, can vouch for that. And the very center of story structure is this idea of the hero. So let's unpack this question a little bit. Why do I use the term hero when the word hero does trigger sometimes a little confusion or pushback? The word has connotations, right? Well, as a student of mine recently pointed out, you know, pretty much all words have connotations. We live in a culture, we live in a time and a place. And for many people, the word hero automatically triggers an idea of a person who has very special, almost superhuman qualities. For many people, the default idea of a hero is male. And for many people, the default tone or genre of the idea of a hero is, you know, the world of superheroes, the Marvel universe. Is that what I mean when I say hero? No, it's not what I mean. When I use the word hero, I'm using it as part of a tradition of thinkers about the relationship between story and what it means to be human. And in my own path, the most influential thinker about this topic has been Joseph Campbell. Now, anyone who's done even a little bit of a dive into learning story structure is likely to have heard of Joseph Campbell. The very short introduction that I'm honored to give you is that Joseph Campbell was a scholar of myth, and he spent his career researching, reading, and comparing myths from all throughout history and from a wide range of cultures around the world. And his analysis of myth was based on his feeling that storytelling is not entertainment. It's what we humans seem almost inevitably programmed to do, to make sense of our lives, to make sense of what it means to be human, what it means to live a life full of meaning. It's part of our search for meaning. The stories that we tell are part of the human search for meaning. All right. Now, we started telling stories, you know, a long time before there was a printing press, a long time before there was written language, right? We started telling stories by painting them on the walls of caves. Storytelling has been part of the human impulse for as long as we can look, as long as we can find evidence. So the question sounds kind of heavy duty and profound, but it's a really significant one. What is the role of storytelling in the experience of being human? So Joseph Campbell really dug into this, and as someone who's been moved by and drawn to telling stories as long as I can remember, this work really has had an influence and an impact on me. And Joseph Campbell referred to the central figure of a story as the hero, and it's part of his work that has created this feeling of uh, it's part of his work that's created this concept of the hero's journey, I should say, which is how you'll hear it referred to. Many people have taken this idea of the hero's journey and run with it. I am one of those people. I've taken that idea and I've run with it, and I've crafted it into my own framework that I use in my own work and I use when I teach. So it's a bit of an homage to Joseph Campbell's original work that I use the word hero. And I invite you to think about hero in that way. Drop the contemporary cultural connotations of it and see it more the way Joseph Campbell sees it, as a kind of a metaphor for each one of us. We are the hero of our own lives, right? And so the hero's journey is the story that we tell ourselves that helps us make sense of our own lives. It's not something that we necessarily do only in hindsight either. Once students are familiar with the concept of the hero's journey, it is inevitable that these metaphors and these images and symbols start to become a way of understanding life and a way of even finding wisdom and clarity about what we ourselves are going through. So that's why I use the word hero, and I invite you to start using it the same way. There's another more practical reason that I use the word hero, because without it, we're stuck with words like protagonist or main character, and those words have connotations as well. The connotations that they have for most writers and many of the students that I work with is that it just plunges them back into high school English class, and they start thinking about their art not as a powerful form of self-expression that is designed to have this incredible, profound, energetic exchange with the reader, but as something to get right. Sometimes I'll be working with a student and I'll say something about story structure, and they'll, based on my framework, which is very inflected with hero's journey type thinking, and the student will look at me and go, and they'll come back to me and they'll say, but how does this relate to, falling action? And I'll be like, what? And then we'll go back to that day in 10th grade where some, well-intended instructor said, oh, this is how you understand a story. They just draw a line on the board. There's rising action and falling action. And it sort of plunges us into this very almost superficial, analytical, somewhat untrained literary critic stance toward our own work. And I don't find that helpful for writers. What I find helpful for writers is understanding the profundity of what it is that we're setting out to do. We are drawing from the deep well of our own humanity to create narratives that, with skill, we're going to implant in the consciousness of our readers so that they are going to have a profound experience of their own humanity. This isn't about drawing diagonal lines on the blackboard. It's a much richer journey, and it's to me, a much more important calling. Those of us who have the urge to write and tell stories know how deep it runs. It's not superficial. So that's another reason that I find the word hero to just have a little bit more of the gravitas that I think talking about storytelling truly deserves. So my definition of the word hero is the central figure whose transformation makes the story necessary. It's nothing short of that. The central figure whose transformation makes the story necessary. Now, the key word in there is transformation. A story is a journey of change. What is it that changes? Well, a lot of things might change, but the essential motor, the seed that's planted, right, that springs into story, is the need for change of the hero, the transformation of the hero, right? And it's not just a change of clothes. Joseph Campbell calls it a transformation of consciousness. It is nothing less than that. All right. So that's what we're talking about, the hero. Already we're in deep waters. Okay. So I mentioned, part of my goal today is to help look at the little pushback and the questions that frequently come up. So the first one, now that I've laid out my philosophy of what the hero is, a central figure whose transformation is what makes the story necessary, the first piece of pushback is the student who says, well, but what if my hero doesn't change? And they'll ask me this question quite, sincerely, right? It's not meant to be contrarian. It's like they've got a story that they've conceived of in their head. And in the story that perhaps they've written a draft, the hero doesn't change. And so they're trying to relate to what's being taught to them. And they immediately observe that, but my hero doesn't change. So what kind of story is that? So allow me to talk about brownies for a minute, chocolate brownies. If anybody's out there who's hungry, I apologize. But if you brought me chocolate brownies and they didn't taste good, and you said, Mary Rose, I made chocolate brownies and they don't taste good, can you tell me what's wrong? And I look at them and they're like not even brown, and I taste them and it doesn't taste good at all, and it doesn't taste like chocolate, I would be immediately saying, well, what, there's I don't think there's any chocolate in these brownies. What are you doing here? And you would say to me, oh, no, yeah, they're chocolate brownies, but there's no chocolate in my brownies, but they don't taste good. Can you help me? And you see what I'm driving at here. If your hero doesn't change, the first and most obvious explanation, and the answer that I'm going to give you first, if I'm your mentor, is that you actually need to rethink your story. It's not like, what kind of story is this in which my hero doesn't change? It's, wait a minute, you're making chocolate brownies, but you didn't put the chocolate in. The whole point of the story is to depict change, to take both hero and vicariously reader on a meaningful journey of change. That is, in fact, the whole point. So don't leave the chocolate out of your brownies. If you think your hero doesn't change, the first thing you need to look at is, well, maybe you need to rethink your story. Now, there are scenarios in which you might say, well, that hero doesn't seem to change. Is it still a hero? Yes, right? This is what I want to explore today. There's kind of these little corners of storytelling in which you can find what might seem at first to be like exceptions to the rule of the centrality of the hero, but bear with me, because I think you're going to find that's not always the case. If you're writing a serial character, by which I mean a great example, right, is Sherlock Holmes, a character who is the central figure in a series of tales. And that hero doesn't seem to change from tale to tale to tale to tale to tale. That's somewhat of a different structure. Each individual episode, if you will, is going to have a transformation in it, but it might not be that enormous, deep transformation of the hero's consciousness. Now, these are still stories that are entertaining to readers, that are satisfying. There's nothing wrong with writing them, but they tend to be different in form because they're not intended to close. They're intended to leave the door open for further storytelling. So in a genre that we'll often see, the detective genre, there's many examples of this, where your main character is a detective solving mysteries, solving crimes. Does that character undergo a huge transformation of consciousness in each story? No, but something else changes. There's a mystery that is unsolved, and that character, through their actions, brings the mystery to solution. What is hidden becomes known. There is a shift in consciousness, but it may not be a huge shift in consciousness of the hero themselves. It's an exercise in a repeating shift in consciousness from not knowing to knowing. So that's a trope of the genre. And you can look at that genre, of course, of mystery is so popular. It will always be popular. It's always been popular. It will always be popular. And you can start to, get your inner Joseph Campbell out and say, well, why is it so popular? Why is it so satisfying to solve a mystery? Because that's the meaning of the journey. We want to go from unconsciousness to consciousness. So in a more classical or traditional hero's journey novel length tale, where you have a character like Bilbo Baggins who goes on the transformation of consciousness of his life and ends up being a very different fellow at the end than he is at the beginning, what boiled down to its simplest form, it's to move from unconsciousness to consciousness, from darkness to light, from not knowing to knowing, from being like the vision is veiled to clarity of vision. So a mystery story is like an appetizer of that. It's like a beautiful little mini snow globe of going from not knowing to knowing. And we like to have that experience again and again and again. Maybe that's why mysteries are so popular. So you won't see the transformation so much in the hero, but you will see that each one of those delicious little stories is like a journey from unconsciousness to consciousness in miniature. And they go down really easy. They go down one after another, right? Another type of hero that might not have a big personal transformation of consciousness is a kind of comedy figure, a comic or trickster figure who is themselves the cause of the change of consciousness that others go on. Bugs Bunny doesn't really change, right? From tail to tail to tail. Bugs is just Bugs, but his trickster energy, the trouble he causes, creates adventures for others to go on. They have to cope with their moving from being in a state of dignity and having their ego tightly bound and stuff into it all falling apart. And then Bugs always lives to do it again. So it's very similar in a sense to what I said about the mystery tale, which is that there is a transformation of consciousness. It's just that our central figure is more the provocateur than the one who's going on the journey of consciousness changing, but it's there. It's just a little bit flipped. And again, you'll see that this works best in short form type storytelling. We might not feel as nourished if we come for a real full meal of story as readers or viewers, and we're given these smaller episodes of these little kind of appetizer stand-ins for the full transformation of consciousness. It might not engage us for 2 hours. It might not, length of a film, or it might not engage us for the many hours that it would take to read a full-length novel. It's not quite enough. You see what I'm saying? It's enough for a taste. It's enough for an appetizer. It's enough for a short story. It's enough for a short cartoon. But it might not sustain our interest over the length of a more substantial work because we are looking for something more. All right. And the last thing I want to say kind of invites a little exploration of the nature of change, which is you might say, but my hero doesn't change because they don't learn their lesson. They refuse to change. And that is a very valid point. And that means that you are writing a tragedy. So let's talk about the types of change that might come up for a hero. There's positive change. And I think that when I talk about the hero's journey and the types of stories that we use as examples, we are most often talking about positive change, moving from unconsciousness to consciousness, from a partial or incomplete or inaccurate sense of self to something that is more accurate and expansive and involves a discovery of one's interconnectedness, one's responsibility to others, right? This, again, it sounds kind of heady, but if you look at it, even at stories that seem quite simple and not at all philosophically complex, have this quality. Look at Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She starts out with a pretty simple goal. She just wants to get home to Kansas. But in order to achieve her goal, she ends up liberating this entire realm from the rule of not one, but two tyrannical, evil, wicked witches and a false wizard. And before she leaves, she puts wise rulers in their place. It's like Hamlet. She just sort of sets the kingdom right, and then she makes her exit, right? So you can see that there's this quality of positive change in a hero who doesn't seem like they go on some huge journey of transformation, but they have done it. They've shown their bravery, they've been through trials, and they've made sacrifices. And as a consequence, not only do they get what they want, but they learn to want better things. They end up wanting better things that are not just about themselves, but are of benefit to the larger world. So that's positive change. And honestly, most of the stories you love are stories of positive change. There is negative change. You may have heard the term the anti-hero, and you'll find all kinds of definitions of that. But a hero who is an anti-hero is simply a hero who goes on a journey of negative change. And often they will be motivated in relatable ways. And I'll use two examples that are similar in a sense. And it's a very popular type of story, as you'll see. So The Godfather, largely hailed as one of the finest movies ever made, based on a novel and very closely adapted from the novel, I might add, by Mario Puzo, is the story of a hero who is in a world of criminality. It's also his family. And when we meet him, he is trying to escape. He wants to go legit. He wants to leave the world of criminality behind and have a better life. And that's his vision at the beginning of the tale. And over the course of the tale, he makes decisions that step by step lead him in the opposite direction of what he said he wanted. Rather than extricating himself from the family business of criminality, Michael Corleone, who is the war hero's son that we meet at the beginning of the film, ends up not only descending into the world of criminality, but taking his father's place as the leader of the family. The die is cast. It's a journey of negative change. He is a prince who does become king, but he becomes the king of the wrong thing. And so that is a profound journey of transformation, but it's not a positive journey. It's a negative journey. So that doesn't really fall under the category of what if my hero doesn't change, but it does answer the question that some writers will have about the hero's journey when they think, but my character's not, he's not going to figure it out. He's going to go on a different kind of journey. He's not going to end up being sacrificial and saving the world and, stopping the war and rescuing her family. And he's not going to do those things. He's going to do bad stuff. And that's how it's going to go. You may, in fact, be writing an anti-hero. Another great example of an anti-hero, again, widely acclaimed as one of the best television series ever written, is Breaking Bad, which is not for every viewer. It's pretty brutal. It's a violent and disturbing show, but it is magnificent storytelling. And Michael Corleone is born into a world of criminality that he tries to escape, and along the way just gets dragged all the way down to the bottom. Breaking Bad is a story of a person who is not a criminal, who is not involved in criminality. He's a high school chemistry teacher. His name is Walter White. And life puts him in a terrible predicament. He has a cancer diagnosis. He has money troubles. He has a family with challenges. He's got kids to support. His wife just had a new baby. There's a lot of pressure on him. And character is revealed under pressure. And under pressure, Walter White makes a fatal mistake. He makes a very bad decision. He falsely believes that he can dabble in criminality and get out again. He can go in to the dark side, get what he needs, and get out again. And over the course of, I think it's 5 or 6 seasons of absolutely riveting storytelling, he goes on that same journey where all along he thinks he's making the right decision, but he gets dragged deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. All right. So these are anti-heroes. When I say we're writing a tragedy, there's a term called a tragic hero. And a tragic hero is, to me, King Lear is a great example of a tragic hero, but so is the character of Thorin in The Hobbit. And I think it's more fun to talk about Thorin, don't you? A tragic hero is not so much, it's not like necessarily a Michael Corleone or a Walter White, although you could argue that they're tragic heroes as well. A tragic hero is presented with an opportunity to change, and they just refuse it. They just refuse to learn their lesson. And they keep thinking, and I guess it is similar to what these other characters go through, these anti-hero characters. They keep thinking that they can just get away with things the way they are, that they can hold on to their ego, they can hold on to their false beliefs, that even when the pressures of the story are urging them to change, that they're never able to. They're never able to. And one of the great, beautiful, moving scenes near the end of The Hobbit is when Thorin, who's the head of the dwarves and who has taken all of them, including our hero Bilbo, on this long and dangerous journey, finds himself finally in possession of the ancestral gold that was the point all along, but becoming in possession of this ancestral gold is now sparking a terrible war. It has been retrieved at the cost of many lives. Disturbing the dragon that was sitting on it has caused that dragon to go on a rampage. A lot of folks have been impacted negatively and are rightly upset about it. And yet Thorin cannot budge. He's too attached. He's so attached to his original conception of what this adventure was about that he cannot change his mind. And what we have in The Hobbit is a beautiful structure where you have the hero Bilbo and the anti-hero Thorin having to face off each other. Bilbo is the hero truly because he gets it. He recognizes the need for change. He's open to a new understanding of what the real problem is. And so he changes his strategy. He does new things. He's willing to sacrifice himself. His values expand. He started out wanting his share of the gold. That's why he went on the adventure to begin with. But he ends up understanding that it's not about gold at all. It's about friendship and it's about peace. Thorin cannot change his conception. He cannot let go of it. And he's a tragic figure because at the very, very end of his life, he ends up, being destroyed by his refusal to learn, his refusal to change, until on his deathbed, like Lear, there's a moment of transcendence. And he is able to look at Bilbo and says, okay, I'm about to die, but my closing words are, you were right. And we should all be more like you, Bilbo. And it's a beautiful scene. I can talk about it with you guys now, but when I read it, I cry. I mean, it is just a gorgeous scene. So you can look at Thorin as an example of a hero who didn't change. If Thorin were the main character of The Hobbit, which he's not, you could say, well, he's a hero who didn't change. He's a tragic figure. There's a bunch of Greek tragedies about guys just like Thorin. They get set on a path for what they think is the right reason. They feel justified. They feel noble. But all of the forces of the story are warning them away from their path. They don't listen. And they end up paying the ultimate price. Greek tragedies, Shakespearean tragedies, they tend to run along these tracks. So these are other permutations of the hero. All right. Now, here's one that I hear sometimes. I'll be going on and on about how heroes have to level up and learn to sacrifice, and the story gets deeper and wider and wisdom comes. And someone will say, okay, but what if my hero is a jerk? And I'll say, okay, what? Talk to me about this. And we'll find out that someone's writing a story about a character that they feel is very flawed. Their conception of this character is that they are fearful, they are neurotic, they are very complicated, they make terrible choices, they're, not a very good person. And yet they want to write a story about this person, and they feel intimidated by the idea of hero because they're sort of stuck in that connotation that hero's got to be somebody great. But I say to you, people who are writing stories about characters who are kind of badly behaved, uninformed, if the story is a journey of transformation, we need to create a hero who needs to change. And there's nothing more delicious, in a way, than a story that takes a person who seems almost intractable and brings them on a journey of major transformation. I'm going to throw two examples at you guys. The movie fans out there, Groundhog Day, right? I mean, that is a story where you take a guy who's just insufferably obnoxious, and in classic hero's journey story structure, you put him through top trials. He has to go through test after test, and when he gets it wrong, he has to repeat the tests. I mean, that's the trick of Groundhog Day, is that the character doesn't go on a sequential journey through time and space. He goes on a loop journey through time. So he's not crossing Middle Earth on his way to a mountain. He's not heading across the universe like McMurray in A Wrinkle in Time to find her father. He's stuck in a loop of time. But that is his journey, and it is test after test after test, and it gives him the opportunity to learn and grow and change, so that he's not so much of a jerk at the end. And that's what's so wonderful about the story. Literature fans, and I'm not saying you can't be both, because I love all of these things. What about Ebenezer Scrooge? Was there ever a character who was more of a jerk than Ebenezer Scrooge? When we meet him, who is in more desperate need of transformation than Ebenezer Scrooge? That's what makes him the hero of A Christmas Carol. Not that he's so great, not that he's wearing a cape and is destined, to be the only one who can pull the sword out of a stone. That's a very classical type of storytelling. Ebenezer Scrooge is a composite of all of our worst traits. He is humanity at its most selfish and defended, and lacking in empathy, and so hurt that he just lashes out at others. And he is definitely gives truth to that saying that hurt people hurt people. Ebenezer Scrooge is hurting inside. We're going to find out over the course of his adventure exactly why he's so hurting, but he makes terrible choices. He gives into the dark side, and all of that has happened before we meet him. We meet him at his worst. And then the story takes him on that journey of transformation. Now, Ebenezer Scrooge goes all the way. He becomes everybody's favorite guy by the end, right? And he does it all in one night. There's a little supernatural assistance, which does tend to hurry things along. And also, Dickens is an incomparable storyteller. So it all manages to happen. This from soup to nuts, a spiritual transformation that takes us to the furthest end of change in a very short book. And it's deeply satisfying. But your protagonist may start out maybe not as bad as Ebenezer, and maybe your vision for your story is that it's not realistic for them to have that complete spiritual turnaround by the end. And you may be thinking of them as changing somewhat, being slightly improved by the end. And that's not unworkable, but you just need to balance the satisfaction of your reader against the length and complexity of your storytelling. Because a very long book, a very long and complicated story in which your hero goes on a modest journey of transformation is not going to satisfy. So I encourage you to dig deeper. We'll go back to my chocolate brownie metaphor. Like if I tell you, there's not enough chocolate in these brownies, that's why they taste bad. And you're like, okay, I know what I'm going to do. And you go back and you sprinkle some nibs on top and you bring it back to me. No, no, no. I mean, like load them up with chocolate. See how much transformation you can get in there. That is the very definition of what your hero is all about. I'm going to take a moment to stop and look at the comments. Nancy's here. Hey, Nancy. I'm going to just bring this comment up. I tend to make all my heroes into little goody two-shoes. I love that you shared this. I think it is relatable, and I think it is something that that writers sometimes struggle with, right? Which is that if your hero doesn't need to change, there's not much juice to power your story. There's not much story energy available to you. And there are tales. I'm thinking of a favorite childhood book of mine, Heidi, in which the main character, like Little Orphan Annie, is just so naturally gifted, is kind of naturally spiritually gifted, right? That they bring joy and light everywhere they go. And so they become almost like a mentor hero, that they become a source of transformation to the people they meet. And yet one has to be careful about that, whether you could argue in Heidi that her grandfather is the one who goes through the big journey of transformation. Does that make him the hero of the book? Heidi goes through a big journey of transformation as well. She's naturally good, and she's naturally responsive to the glory of nature. And so she becomes a kind of a goad to those around her who are not appreciative. The character of her grandfather's grouchy old man, Ebenezer Scrooge in the Alps, we'll call him. He's grouchy. He's unkind. He's cut off his connection to the other people of the town, so much so that they've started to imagine him as a monster. But contact with this naturally spiritually gifted child who sees the beauty of life reawakens their grandfather's goodness and rebuilds his relationship with the town. But the name of the book is Heidi, and I would argue that those types of characters are still on a journey of change. They may have a profound impact on the world around them, but it's a valid thing to explore if you feel that is the type of character that you're working with. But I'm going to guess, Nancy, that not just based on my experience. It's that when we invent a character, we find it hard to detach ourselves, to kind of cut the umbilical cord sufficiently to give that character unattractive qualities, to think about what circumstances they are truly in, not just externally, but internally. We want our characters, we want to treat them almost the way we would treat a beloved child, right? That we want to protect them from harm. We don't want to put them in terrible situations. And I want to remind everybody, and I say this as someone who writes middle grade fiction, our characters are not our children, even if our characters are young. We are not the mothers of our protagonists, of our heroes. We are the artist, the puppeteer, the designer of the tale who's behind the scenes. And the hero, which is our topic today, is a kind of a spiritual avatar for our reader to have a profound experience. of transformation. We're going to take our reader on a controlled journey, right? Now, some people like roller coasters. I am not one of them. But a roller coaster, to those who like it, is like a controlled adventure of tremendous impact, tremendous emotional impact. It takes you to the edge of feeling like, this is unbelievably dangerous, and yet it returns you safely at the end. For many of us who get car sick, that's not an experience that has any value to me. But fiction, good storytelling, is basically the same thing. It's designed to take your reader on a journey that chances are they would not want to have in real life, but it's a vicarious thrill. It allows the reader to have this fantastic experience. And at the end, close the book and say, oh, that is amazing. I'm going to tell all my friends about it. I can't wait to talk to people about this, right? They're going to be impacted by it. So if we don't allow enough of a roller coaster ride to happen to our hero, we're depriving our reader of the full, vivid, vicarious experience that they in fact came to us for. That is what the story is. So always think about this reluctance to make your hero flawed or put them through the mill. We're sort of, alas, we may be very nice people, but we have to put our heroes through the mill of storytelling. The transformation will only happen if we design a story that applies sufficient pressure, because that's how change happens. Change doesn't happen when everything's going great. When everything's going great, we're like, let's enjoy it. Things have to be unstable in order for them to need to topple the way the beginning of a story needs to topple. So we're sort of going off on some interesting tangents about the kinds of heroes that we tend to come up with and how they can work in various kinds of stories. The last thing I want to talk about before really looking and inviting some more questions from you guys is, in a way, the most common question that people will come up with. What if I have more than one hero? So it's possible to write a story that has many threads of the plot. And you could argue that the central figure in each subplot that you design is, in fact, the hero of that subplot. You will see sometimes collections of related short stories. Each one will have a different central character, and that central character is the main character of that story, yet the stories are published in a group. They're all designed to go together. You may see an example of a really expansive epic tale, and I'm thinking of Game of Thrones here, where so much of the storytelling involves depicting the experiences of warring factions. And so the storyteller travels freely among the points of view of the central figure in each of these subplots. So one sees this, one sees it. But that's not usually what's going on when a developing writer says to me, oh, but my story has more than one hero. What I'm usually getting from that writer is that they haven't decided who the main character is, or the main character's journey of transformation is pretty intimately connected to another important character's experience. And so they think of them both as heroes because they get equal page time, or it just feels like they are doing this together. You will find, though, that those types of stories it's not even-handed. Usually one of these heroes is, in fact, the main hero, and the other one is the shadow figure, the love interest, right? Some essential counterpart without whom our original hero's journey doesn't really exist, but that there's a feeling of starting with the main hero's journey and ending with the main hero's journey. We can talk about ensemble stories and the idea of a group protagonist in fiction if we look at, like, I think simple real world examples, like a sports team. When you go to see a sporting event, it's baseball season now, so we could talk about baseball. You're watching two teams. You're watching a story, right, between two teams. Which one's going to win at the end? Now, your chances are you're rooting for your team. So you see your home team as the hero of the story, and the other team is the villain. And as each, play goes on and each inning goes on, that's the progression of the tale. So you are, in a sense, rooting for a group identity. But even in the watching of a game where you're rooting for a team to prevail, which is what we might consider like an ensemble type story, an ensemble cast of characters, there are still individual figures who leap out, just as my cat Ralph just leaped onto my lap and he wants to say hello. Hello, honey. Oh, he's purring. Just as Ralph just leaped onto my lap, there are individual characters on the team who are going to leap out at different moments of the story, and they're going to be the most important ones. Maybe the pitcher is going to be the most important figure to watch at a certain point in the story. Maybe the play at first base is going to be the most important thing to watch at a certain point. Maybe the batter who's up, at the bottom of the ninth when the game hangs in the balance, all eyes will be on that character, right? So it's not like the ensemble moves through the story as a blob, as a unit. Even in a sporting event, it's not like that. And even more so in fiction. And I want to tell you why. When we're dealing with rooting for a group, a team, we're in the arena and the game is in front of us. It's before us. Fiction does not happen quite like that. We're in the stands watching a game on the playing field at a sporting event, but fiction happens in our own heads when we sit down to read. The storytelling is actually happening in this incredibly intimate and precise way within our own imaginations. The writer's job is to craft that experience with language so that it arrives in the brain of the reader with some accuracy and precision, so that they have the experience that we designed for them. We've really created this. We've crafted it for the reader. And because of that, because of this this very personal interior experience, our reader is looking for an individual to relate to in the book, in the world of the fictional dream, as another great teacher of writing, John Gardner, called it. This was a phrase that he coined. The fictional dream is had by the reader. It's not had by a team. And so the reader is an individual, and the reader is relating to an individual in this tale. It's like when you play a video game, those of you that play video games, and you have an avatar like in the game, that's you. Like it's you, but it's you going through the game, right? You understand what I mean by that? It's very similar when we read good fiction, that we kind of get the experience of being the character, being the main character. And so it's very hard to sustain that intimate engagement in the fictional dream if we're asking our single reader, right? Our book only gets read in the one mind at a time, to identify with a huge cast of characters that are treated as a group. We find that we're always going to be wanting to pick individuals for the reader to relate to. And if we keep switching, if we keep asking our reader to change which character they're relating to at any given point, It's like someone is having a dream and we keep waking them from it. So imagine how frustrating it is. You're having a dream. It's going great. You're liking the dream, but perhaps my cat Ralph or your cat or some other cat just keeps jumping on you, waking you up. You're like, no, I'm not going to get up yet. And then you want to get back into the dream. The first time, maybe you'll go back into the dream. The second time, maybe you'll get back into the dream. If it keeps happening, you're just going to get up. It's dream over. It's ruined, right? You disengage. Every time we do something that rustles our reader, that shakes them awake from the fictional dream, we're doing the same thing to them. And so we have to be very, very stingy about how often we let ourselves do that. So when you have an ensemble cast with a lot of potential heroes and you treat them as if the reader is happy to say, oh, this one for a while, that one for a while, that one for a while. The reader is not as willing to do that as you would like to think. So when you want to write about a community, I'm going to go back. I know I've been on a Charlotte's Web jag lately, but I can't help it. It's such a great book to look at all these issues with. If you want to write about a community, it doesn't mean that you always have to be writing about a group. You need to craft a story in which the transformation of consciousness goes to that place where you're creating a character, a hero, who actually has an experience that foregrounds the issue of community. And one of the brilliant and very sophisticated things that E.B. White does in Charlotte's Web, which is in fact a tale about so much more than just a pig, is he has the mask of hero, and I'll talk about that in a second. He has the mask of hero handed off from character to character. So there's a large cast, and many characters temporarily wear the mask of the hero. It starts out with Fern, the 8-year-old girl who discovers that a runt pig was born and is about to be slaughtered and saves that pig from slaughter. And then we get to meet that runt pig as it grows up, and it's our hero, Wilbur. And Wilbur is has limited capacity to do stuff, right? And so in order for him to achieve his goal, which is to stay alive, he is dependent on the behavior, the choices of characters who are more able to accomplish things. And most significantly, we meet the character of Charlotte, who's a spider. And through their friendship, Charlotte takes on the mask of hero and does the brave and sacrificial things in order to help save Wilbur's life. And then the mask of hero is passed back to Wilbur, who then does a brave and sacrificial thing to save Charlotte's children and to preserve his attachment, to exhibit his love and his attachment to the legacy of Charlotte, his friend Charlotte, who's at this point has died. And you see the sophistication of this, but it's not a jumble because the through line is so clear. It is a transformation of consciousness about how precious life is, how interconnected everyone on this farm is, how inexorable the march of time is, and how mortality, the inevitability of death, makes everything more precious. That is Wilbur's journey. That is what he comes to understand, right? But it's embedded in everything in the story. Every time the mask of the hero gets shifted to another character for a little while, it's the same track. It's the same transformation of consciousness. It just literally takes a village, in this case a farm, to pull it off. So I hope that makes sense. It's not an even-handed everyone in my book is the hero, or there's 4 heroes, or it's about a group of people who do something. That's not going to work for the reader as well as you think it is. And you can challenge yourself to know more clearly what your storytelling is about so that you can weave your single story of transformation through the community that's needed to pull it off. there's all kinds of genres of storytelling that often follow a war story, like follows a unit, and we get to see the relationships between, and each character in the group will have a particular experience. But there's very often a leader in those types of stories as well. So think about that, whether what you think of as an ensemble cast or multiple heroes is actually the story of a hero who has a band of co-adventurers. We've talked a little bit in other live streams about the archetypal energy that the secondary cast of characters brings to a story. And when you've got a primary hero with a group of co-adventurers, those archetypal energies are going to be invaluable to you in understanding the role that each of the other characters will play, not only in the story as a whole, but in the transformation of the hero. So I told you I had a lot of notes and a lot of stuff to say about heroes and all the sort of different ways they manifest in our stories. But I do want to conclude with just a gentle encouragement that if you find yourself saying, well, yeah, but I really like the idea of, having a lot of different viewpoint characters, and my main character doesn't really change. And, if you find yourself pushing back against this sort of very clear idea of a single hero on a transformation of consciousness, I just want you to think of the brownies. I want you to take very seriously, just open your mind to the possibility that this elaborate conception of story that you've got in your head may not be a super sophisticated, complicated masterpiece that only you can write, but it may just be evidence that you haven't figured out your story yet, and that what you are still doing, whether you understand it or not, is just contemplating the world of possibilities. And that what is going to enable you to actually execute this tale is to keep exploring the possibilities, but to embrace the value of using a pretty well-defined story structure, not so that your story is just like everybody else's story. It won't be. I promise you, it won't be. It's going to be your unique expression of this tale, but it will be pleasing to your reader. It will be coherent to your reader. It will leave your reader feeling engaged and satisfied all the way through. That's what story structure gives us. It gives us an understanding of how to arrange the elements of storytelling, all the things that happen that allow Ebenezer Scrooge to be completely transformed by the end. The what Joseph Campbell calls the trials and revelations that allow this transformation to happen. That's what story structure gives us. It reminds us that what we're doing is not drawing diagonal lines on a blackboard, but trying to depict a plausible, relatable, moving, engaging, psychologically accurate depiction of somebody going through a change. In real life, change is really difficult, and most of us push back against the need to change unless the forces of fate really have to pry us out of our comfort zone. We like our comfort zone. We don't want to leave it. Story structure depicts the process of a hero, just like you and me, being pried out of their comfort zone, going on that difficult journey of transformation, and coming out the other end better for it, and the world better for it. It is deeply satisfying. It is consoling. It is instructive. It feels true to the reader because it is true. That is how we go through life. It's how we experience life. If we think about it, and if we start to think about it a lot, we'll see that this happens over and over again. We go through times in our lives where we get in a comfort zone, and then it falls apart, and we've got to level up, and then we'll get to another zone, and then we've got to do it again. The journey is ongoing. So this material is very profound. It's very accurate about what it means to be human, and it's why we love stories so much. So I thank you for sticking around for this long, complicated, and heady talk about the nature of the hero. I'm just going to do a quick view and see if anyone's got any questions. If you do, pop them into the comments now. I'm seeing Jaren's here. It's great to see you, Jaren. Some great comments. I'm not going to put it up, but I'm glad to share that your favorite spectator sport is Quidditch. Talk about the power of storytelling, right? A fictional game becomes our favorite story. I'm just checking on. Jaren, this isn't a question I'm going to pull up from earlier. And if anyone else has one, now's the time to pop in because we're going to wrap up in just a minute. Jared says, reflecting on the idea of writing as a means of self-expression, what if I as an author create a hero that by design is so antipodally different from myself? Way to rock the vocab. That's such a great question. I do feel that we can fall into the camp of writing characters that are thinly veiled versions of ourselves. And sometimes those are the characters that we find it hardest to really put the pressure on and put them through the rough journey of trials and revelations that is necessary. But if you create a hero that is so different from yourself, is it still self-expression? And I would say, how could it not be? How could it not be self-expression, even if we create a character that that we feel is just a totally different version of ourselves? We contain multitudes, don't we? We human beings. We in each of us, we have parts of ourselves that are socially acceptable, that are habitual, that we have been encouraged over our lives to express, the face that we show the world. But that doesn't mean that's all that we are, or all that we get, or all that we feel. And there are very many nice and pleasant people who write, the grisliest horror stories, right? It doesn't mean that they're not expressing themselves. They're expressing something. They're using story in its true form. It's a symbolic dreamscape. It's not literal. Fiction has this kind of quality that it can feel very real. A well-written story can feel like it's really happening. It's sort of what we want to have happen. We want the reader to experience it as if it's really happening to them. But it's all art, and art is artifice, and that's a good thing. It doesn't mean it's fake. It means that it is artfully designed. It is curated. It is chosen. It's not the real cow standing out in the field. It's the two-dimensional depiction of the cow rendered in oil paints on a canvas. If you turn the canvas around, you don't see the other side of the cow. You just see the back of the canvas. It's pretend. It's artifice. Fiction is the same. And yet we are trying to tell the truth about life as we understand it. There's no other well to draw from but our own understanding of what life is all about, our own values, our own experience of emotions. If I write a character who commits murder, I've never committed murder. It's hard for me to get me to lose my temper, actually. I'm a pretty even-keeled kind of person. But if I had to write that scene, I would have to find it in myself to imagine it. And it would be my imagining of it. It would still be drawn from the well of my own experience. And it would be perhaps a statement of some kind, but within the realm of the story, it's not real. It's all symbolic. So we talked a little bit about fiction as a dream. And just as people who interpret dreams do, within the dream, things have meaning. but it's not always literal meaning. It's symbolic meaning. So part of our job as authors is to invent things that convey the right symbolic meanings in the dream that we are then going to place inside the brain of our unsuspecting reader. It's really cool to think about. All right, my friends. Thanks so much for spending this time. I've enjoyed talking about this subject with you. If you have further questions, don't be shy. Leave them in the comments below this video on YouTube so that I can keep the conversation going with you. If you're here and you haven't subscribed to the channel, I would love it if you subscribe to the channel. You could even ring the little bell so that you'll get notified when I go live. If you're watching on Facebook, same. You got more questions, we'll keep the conversation going. You can just post comments below the video. I'm so grateful to have you all here participating live. I'm grateful if you're watching on the replay. It's my pleasure to throw a little mentor energy your way. I'm here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific. And last but not least, if you want to know more about the Path of the Storyteller program, head on over to that website, www.pathofthestoryteller.com, and get your name on the mailing list, and so that you can start getting a weekly email from me that will keep you up to date on what's going on weekly here on the live stream, and also some of the trainings and other experiences that are going to be coming up, including the running of the Path of the Storyteller flagship course, which is going to happen in the fall. All right, guys, happy writing. Have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you next time.